Okay, guys, I don't know how many of you are going to be in here tonight, but I'm sure some of you will be seeing this later on. Right now, Digital Hammurabi is live. They are just wrapping up. So hopefully, I will get some people in here. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about science today, particularly psychological science, because that's what I majored in college. And I know a lot about psychological experiments. I do know on a very elementary level about experimentation in other sciences, but for my purposes, I'm going to stick with psychology because that's what I am comfortable with. So, for those of you who have never gone to college, um, there are a few rules of scientific experimentation, at least in psychology, that we should keep in mind. Um, One is that we cannot prove a negative. Um, and this is basically saying, okay, so when you think of an experiment, you have basically two hypotheses. One is called the hypothesis. The other one is called the null hypothesis. And the null hypothesis is just putting a not in front of the hypothesis. For instance, to say that an imbalance of norepinephrine causes depression, which it is correlated, but we don't know that the imbalance of norepinephrine causes depression. We just know it's a correlation at the moment. So let's just say that our hypothesis is that an imbalance of norepinephrine causes depression. Our null hypothesis must be that an imbalance of norepinephrine does not cause depression. Okay, so this is what creationists don't understand. And most of them never went to college. And of those who've gone to college, they've gone to the wrong type of college, except Georgia Purdom, who went to Ohio State. For some reason, she's a creationist. And I have no idea why, because she knows better. But basically, what you're doing in a psychological experiment, I don't know about other experiments, but in a psychological experiment, you can either um, reject the null or you can fail to reject the null. Now, keep in mind that failing to reject the null hypothesis is not the same as accepting the null hypothesis. You can never accept a null hypothesis in psychological science. You can only fail to reject the null hypothesis. So that's basically what you're doing when you are conducting an experiment in the psychological sciences. You have your hypothesis and you have the null hypothesis. And basically, you are testing the null hypothesis because you can never accept your hypothesis. neither can you accept the null hypothesis. You can either reject the null hypothesis, which is not the same, by the way. Hi, Free Spirit. Hi, Old Scratch. No, not statistical significance, just about how you go about scientifically verifying things. Um, so, okay. So the null hypothesis and the hypothesis. When you reject the null hypothesis, that is not the same as saying that you accept the hypothesis. You can never, at least in psychological science, you can never accept the hypothesis. You can only reject the null because there are other factors that you must, that's my baby boy Tux. There are other factors that you have to consider. And when you're talking about psychological experiments, you can never control all of the variables. So that is why you reject the null or fail to reject the null. This is true, Old Scratch. This is true. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. So, rejecting the null does not mean accepting the hypothesis. Neither does failing to reject the null mean that you accept the null hypothesis. It's just the way things work. You can reject the null or fail to reject the null. That's all you can do. And I am not good at statistics. I failed statistics the first time I took it in college. And the only reason I passed it the second time was that the teacher put the formulae up on the board. Except she said we had to know what it was for. Now, in statistics, and this is why I had a hard time with statistics. In statistics, there can be 3 or 4 formulas for the same thing, depending on what you're talking about. Hi, Mark. So, if you have like, I don't even, I think there's an omega in statistics, but say you have an omega. Well, you can have 3 or 4 different formulae for omega depending upon what you're talking about. And this makes statistics very, very difficult. So I can know like what alpha this particular formula is for, but I cannot memorize all 4 formulas for, thanks, Mark, for alpha, if that makes sense. So that's the reason I passed statistics the second time, was the formulae were on the board, but we had to know what they were for. It's fine, I can do that. Statistics to prove that people don't like statistics. Nice, Mark. So anyway, now there are 2 different levels called confidence intervals that you can set. And basically just run a computer program. That's how I do it. Go to Excel. You can run statistics in Excel. So there are 2 different confidence intervals you can have in your experiment. You can have a 95% confidence interval, or you can have a 99% confidence interval. Now, you may think that the 99% confidence interval is more appealing, more confident. However, there are two ideas in statistics. Mark, I'm not quite sure. I don't think so. I'm sure Excel does, but this was just elementary statistics. So when we're talking about confidence intervals, the 95% confidence interval and the 99% confidence interval, we have two opposing concepts in statistics. We have validity over here, and we have reliability over here. And I'm not even going to go into what reliability and validity are. If you know, that's great. It's not really necessary for this particular. This is Tux, by the way, if you didn't know. It's not necessary that you know what validity and reliability are. But if you use a 99% confidence interval, the reliability goes up. I think it's the reliability goes up, but the validity correspondingly goes down. So they're like, if one goes up, the other goes down. So it really depends on what you're searching for as to whether you use a 95% CI or confidence interval or a 99% CI. And most psychological experiments use a 95% CI. And most, not all, but most psychological experiments are done on actually they work out to a bell curve. And the bell curve is exactly what it sounds like. You have 0 in the middle, you have positive over here, you have negative over here, and you have an even distribution. So when we're talking about a 95% confidence interval, we are talking about we have two excuse me, two tails on the bell curve. We throw out the negative 2.5 tail and we throw out the positive 2.5 tail. And what that means is that ideally 95% of the data is going to fall within that bell curve after we get rid of the negative 2.5% and the positive 2.5%. So I'm, and let me tell you something. If you don't understand this, it took me a long time to understand this. If you don't understand this, it's fine. But my point is that a lot of creationists think that this stuff is linear, and it's not. And even if you're not running statistics, I was watching Logic and Pelagia. They were doing a thing about Jupiter cooling down. And So basically, I'm saying all this to say it's not as simple as the creationists tell you it is. And if any creationist is watching this, you need to know this. You don't need to know about the statistics part of it, but you need to know that things are not as simple as the creationists want you to think it is. For instance, Jupiter cooling off is not a linear progression and never has been. Okay, there's a formula for it. How do we know there's a formula for it? That's above my pay grade, man. I have no idea. I am not a mathematician. Ask a mathematician. They'll, or physicist. Physicists would actually be a better person to ask. So basically, my point is that nothing is as simple. If you are a creationist, nothing is as simple as your leaders make it out to be. Kent Hovind, Eric Hovind, Matt Powell, Steve Anderson, whoever you're listening to, it is never that simple because nothing in the real world actually progresses in a linear fashion. It just doesn't. Hi, Maddie Verity. So when you listen to your leaders, you need to step back and say, okay, is this really as simple as they're making it out to be? Because I guarantee you it isn't as simple as they're making it out to be. There are statistical models, there are formulae, there are non-linear whatevers out there, and it is never simple. Ever. Okay? So put your thinking cap on and start asking these questions like I did. And you will find out that they really okay. I'm gonna level with you guys. Kent Hovind is an idiot, and so is Eric. I'm sorry. There's no better. There's. I cannot say it in a nice way. They're idiots. They don't know nothing from nothing. So anyway, right, Mark. Not news to me either. So just remember this. When you hear these idiotic claims, Jupiter can't lose heat twice as fast as it gains from the sun for 4.5 billion years and still have um, heat to lose. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. It does if you're a simpleton like they are, but hey, frustrated. We're talking about simpletons and psychological experiments and the Hovens because you can't talk about simpletons without the Hovens. Frustrated when we get off. You might want to go back. I was explaining about statistics and how um, we can reject the null or fail to reject the null, and about normal distributions and stuff like that. But anyway, so there will not be an edited video out today. My apologies. Yeah, I'm frustrated. They really don't understand about statistics. Of course, they don't really understand anything at all. But The heavens, I mean. Um, I taught high school science for 25 years. No, you didn't. And if you did, you wouldn't have these idiotic ideas that you do. Correct, Mark. And this is what Logic pointed out on his video with Paulogia, is that for their purposes, they just um, treated Jupiter as an inert ball of gas, which, by the way, it's not. But for their purposes, it was okay because they were saying all we really want to know is whether it's probable enough for us to um, think of it as a possibility. And it actually comes out to, since its accretion, Jupiter has only cooled down about 2000 degrees K, which isn't, I made an oopsie, 2000 K, um, which, if you know the Kelvin scale, isn't that much. This is true, Old Scratch. Radioactive decay, um, you know, so no, it's not frustrated. And we're talking about 4.5 billion years since Jupiter's accretion that it has lost in heat. And that's assuming that it is an inert ball of gas that is not generating its own heat. That's just what it's been um, radiating off into space if we make the assumption, which is not true, that it is not generating its own heat. So 2000 Kelvin, you're very correct. It is not that big of a difference at all. Especially when you're thinking that the center of Jupiter is about 24,000 K. Not that much at all. So, anyway, I just wanted to hop on and give the Christians a bit of a rag in about how they oversimplify everything, and especially the Hovens, because they are the kings of oversimplification. Mark, I'm not sure. It is a gas giant. So would it? I'm not too familiar with the gas giants. Can a meteor actually hit a gas giant or just go through it? Like I said, I'm not too familiar with gas giants. That's a real question, people. This is true, Old Scratch. It does have a core. Yes, frustrated atheist. Unfortunately, he's got a big following. Okay, it wouldn't go through it, Mark. Okay, all right. Like I said, I'm not up to speed on my gas giants, so I don't know anything about the gas giants. So thank you all for being here. I apologize for not having an edited video up today. So any questions before I sign off? Okie dokie. Um, yeah, I don't know where I got that expression from, but it's just something I see every now and then. So I'll end the stream now. Oh, hey, no problem, Old Scratch. This is probably something you guys already know, but I just thought, well, for people who don't know, I'll go ahead and make this video. See you guys later. Bye.